White cop lies about a black woman in court, not knowing she's a high-ranking Navy SEAL. You underestimated me, Officer Simmons. But the truth always finds a way. What could make a courtroom fall silent in shock? A police officer accuses a black woman of resisting arrest and assault. His story is convincing until she takes the stand and turns the entire case upside down. Who is she? And why does her testimony leave the officer, the jury, and even the judge stunned? This is the story of how one lie unraveled, and a fight for justice became a fight for truth. Let's dive into it. The early morning sun peeked through the heavy drapes of the courtroom, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. The room, though grand in design, felt suffocating. Rows of wooden benches were filled with a mix of spectators, curious townsfolk, journalists jotting notes, and a few faces lined with quiet tension. Among them sat Monica Jackson. Her calm exterior betrayed none of the turmoil beneath the surface. Her dark brown skin glowed faintly under the artificial light, and her neatly braided hair rested on her shoulders. Monica sat upright, her back straight, as if guided by an invisible string. Her hands were clasped lightly in front of her. She was dressed modestly in a crisp white blouse and black slacks, a deliberate choice to exude humility and respect. Yet, her sharp eyes scanned the room with precision, taking in every face, every movement. To the casual observer, she looked like any other defendant. But to those paying close attention, there was something unusual about her, a quiet intensity that seemed out of place for someone accused of a violent crime. The bailiff called the court to order, and all eyes turned to the front of the room. Judge Howard Grayson, an older white man with thinning silver hair, entered. He carried an air of authority, though his face betrayed a weariness that came from years of presiding over cases he'd rather forget. This one, however, seemed to ignite a spark of interest in him. Perhaps it was the presence of Officer Bradley Simmons, sitting smugly at the plaintiff's table. Or maybe it was the murmuring about a case that had already captured the attention of local news outlets. State versus Monica Jackson, the bailiff announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Monica rose. Her movements were deliberate and controlled as she faced the judge. The whispers in the room grew louder as people craned their necks for a better view. Officer Simmons leaned back in his chair, his expression one of confidence, almost amusement. Dressed sharply in his police uniform, the officer exuded the kind of arrogance that comes from years of unquestioned authority. Monica's lawyer, Benjamin Carter, a young black attorney fresh out of law school, shuffled nervously through his notes. He glanced at Monica, hoping to find reassurance in her face, but she didn't return the look. Her eyes remained fixed on the judge, her expression unreadable. Carter took a deep breath and stood. "Your Honor," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "We are prepared to proceed." The judge nodded, his gaze shifting to Simmons. "Officer Simmons, you may take the stand." The officer rose, every movement exaggerated, as if he were performing for an unseen audience. He adjusted his uniform before making his way to the witness stand, pausing briefly to glance at Monica. His smirk was faint but unmistakable, a predator sure of his prey. As he took the oath, Monica studied him. She observed the way his fingers fidgeted slightly, the subtle shift in his posture as he sat down. These were details most would overlook. But Monica cataloged them with the precision of someone trained to read body language. She didn't flinch, didn't move, as Simmons began to speak. On the evening in question, Simmons began, his voice steady and loud enough to carry across the room. "I was responding to a disturbance call near the east side of town. I encountered the defendant, Miss Jackson, loitering outside a closed business. There were murmurs in the courtroom. Loitering was often used as a catch-all accusation, especially against people of color." Simmons pressed on, seemingly unfazed. "When I approached her and asked what she was doing there, she immediately became hostile," he continued, his tone taking on a theatrical quality. "She refused to identify herself, raised her voice, and when I attempted to de-escalate the situation, she physically assaulted me." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Monica remained still, her face a mask of calm. Simmons shifted in his seat, feigning a pained expression. "She hit me in the chest and attempted to reach for my service weapon. At that point, I had no choice but to restrain her." From the back of the room, a woman's voice muttered, "Sounds like a lie." Heads turned, but the judge quickly called for order. "Thank you, Officer Simmons," Judge Grayson said, his voice neutral. "You may step down." Monica's lawyer rose, visibly nervous. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to ask the court to consider. Save it for your cross-examination, Mr. Carter," the judge interrupted. "Let's move on." Monica exhaled softly. Her patience was being tested, but she didn't let it show. She leaned slightly toward Carter, whispering, "Stay calm. Focus on the facts." Carter nodded, though he looked far from reassured. As the prosecution rested its case, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. Simmons returned to his seat, his smirk now a full grin. He exchanged a glance with his fellow officers, seated in the back row. Monica didn't miss the wink he gave them. "Miss Jackson," the judge said, his tone carrying an edge of skepticism, "it's your turn to testify." Monica stood, smoothing her blouse as she approached the stand. The room fell silent as she took her seat, the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. She adjusted the microphone in front of her, her movements slow and deliberate. "Miss Jackson," the prosecutor began, a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue, "can you explain your actions on the night in question?" Monica leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and measured. "I can," she said. "But first, I need to clarify one thing. The officer's account is not only inaccurate, but intentionally misleading." There was a collective intake of breath. The prosecutor smirked. "Bold accusation, Miss Jackson. Do you have any proof to back it up?" Monica met his gaze, her dark eyes unyielding. "I believe the truth will come to light soon enough." The prosecutor opened his mouth to retort, but Monica's calm confidence left him momentarily speechless. Judge Grayson cleared his throat, signaling for the questioning to continue. As Monica began to recount her version of events, the tension in the room became palpable. The audience hung on her every word, sensing that this was no ordinary defendant. Unbeknownst to everyone, the wheels of justice were already turning, and the carefully constructed lies of Officer Simmons were beginning to unravel. Monica sat on the stand, her posture as unwavering as her composure. She took a moment before speaking, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the wooden railing. The courtroom's silence was suffocating, every breath held in anticipation of what she might say. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but carried an undeniable strength. "On the night in question," she began, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom, "I was on my way home from visiting a friend. I stopped near the corner of Magnolia and Fifth to check my phone for directions." She paused briefly, allowing the detail to sink in. "That's when Officer Simmons approached me." The prosecutor leaned forward, ready to pounce. "And you're saying this encounter was completely unprovoked?" Monica tilted her head slightly, her expression unwavering. "Not entirely," she admitted. "I was standing on the sidewalk, which, as far as I know, isn't illegal. He approached me with his flashlight pointed directly at my face and asked, in a tone I wouldn't call friendly, what I was doing there. "And how did you respond?" the prosecutor asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "I told him I was checking directions," Monica replied evenly. "He asked for my identification. I asked if I'd done anything wrong." The prosecutor seized the moment. "So you questioned his authority?" "I questioned his motive," Monica corrected, her voice firm but not aggressive. "I wasn't obstructing traffic. I wasn't trespassing. I wasn't causing any disturbance. I wanted to know why he was asking for my ID." A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Judge Grayson banged his gavel lightly. "Order in the court." Monica continued, her tone unchanging. "When I asked for clarification, he raised his voice and accused me of being uncooperative. I told him I wasn't trying to cause any trouble, but before I could say anything else, she paused. Her voice steady, he grabbed my arm. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, clearly trying to decide how to twist her testimony to his advantage. "Are you claiming the officer physically restrained you without cause?" Monica nodded. "Yes. And when I told him to let go, he tightened his grip. He said, and I quote, 'Women like you need to learn how to listen.'" Gasps erupted from the gallery. This time, the judge's gavel came down harder. "Order! I will not tolerate interruptions." The prosecutor forced a smile. "Miss Jackson, that's a serious allegation. Do you have any proof of this statement?" Monica looked directly at him, her gaze unflinching. No, because the body camera he was wearing conveniently malfunctioned. She turned her head slightly, her voice razor sharp. Isn't that right, Officer Simmons? All eyes turned to Simmons, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His confident smirk had faded, replaced by a slight clenching of his jaw. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Let's focus on the facts, Miss Jackson. You claim the officer restrained you. What happened next? Monica folded her hands in her lap, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. I told him I didn't consent to being touched and asked him to let me go. He didn't. Instead, he accused me of resisting arrest even though I hadn't moved. When I tried to pull my arm away, he slammed me against the patrol car. Her words were a punch to the gut for everyone listening. A few people in the audience whispered to one another, their faces a mixture of disbelief and anger. The tension in the room was thick, and even the judge seemed momentarily taken aback. And after that, the prosecutor pressed, his tone more subdued now. Monica's gaze didn't waver. He handcuffed me and told me I was under arrest for assaulting an officer. The prosecutor leaned back, trying to regain control of the narrative. Miss Jackson, you're a strong woman. Is it possible the officer felt threatened by your physical resistance? Monica didn't flinch. I'm not stronger than a trained police officer, she said plainly. And let's be clear, I didn't resist until he violated my rights. The prosecutor opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Monica added, I also didn't reach for his weapon, despite his claims. That was a fabrication to justify his use of force. The room seemed to freeze. Simmons shifted again, visibly uneasy. The prosecutor's face darkened as he struggled to maintain his composure. Miss Jackson, he said, his voice tight, you're asking this court to believe that Officer Simmons, a decorated member of the force, fabricated an entire incident. Do you have anything to back up your version of events? Monica smiled faintly, a subtle but powerful shift in her demeanor. The truth always has a way of revealing itself, counselor. You'll see soon enough. The judge leaned forward. Miss Jackson, are you implying there is evidence the court has not yet seen? Monica's lawyer, Benjamin Carter, stood quickly. Your Honor, we intend to submit additional evidence during the proceedings. The prosecutor scoffed. More stalling tactics. Your Honor, if the defense had anything substantial, they would have presented it already. Monica turned to face the judge. Your Honor, the truth takes time. But I promise you this, when it comes out, it will be undeniable. The judge studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. Very well, we'll recess for today. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. As the gavel came down, the courtroom erupted into whispers. Monica rose from the stand, her movements calm and deliberate. She walked past Officer Simmons, who avoided her gaze, and joined her lawyer at the defense table. Are you sure about this? Carter whispered, his voice filled with doubt. Monica placed a hand on his arm, her grip steady and reassuring. Trust me, Ben. Tomorrow, the truth will speak louder than anything Simmons could ever say. As she walked out of the courtroom, the murmurs of the crowd followed her, a mix of curiosity and speculation. Outside, the sun was setting, casting the town in a warm golden glow. Monica paused on the courthouse steps, her eyes scanning the horizon. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. She had always been ready. The courthouse emptied slowly, the day's tension still clinging to the air like a heavy fog. Monica stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, her silhouette framed against the orange hues of the setting sun. The hum of conversation and the shuffle of feet surrounded her, but she tuned it all out, her focus inward. She had faced tougher battles before, ones where survival wasn't guaranteed. But there was something uniquely suffocating about fighting in a courtroom, where the truth could be buried under lies. Benjamin Carter appeared at her side, his face a portrait of concern. The young lawyer clutched his briefcase tightly, as if it contained not just papers but the weight of his responsibility to her. Monica, he said hesitantly, his voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. She turned her head slightly, her gaze calm but unyielding. What's on your mind, Ben? He exhaled deeply, his breath visible in the cool evening air. You have to tell me what you're holding back, he said. The judge knows it. The prosecutor knows it. And Simmons. He glanced back toward the courthouse. He's getting nervous. Whatever ace you're hiding, I need to know before we walk back into that courtroom tomorrow. Monica's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. You'll know when the time is right. That's not enough, he pressed, lowering his voice even further. I'm your lawyer. If we're going to win this, I need to be prepared for whatever bombshell you're planning to drop. She studied him for a moment, the weight of her silence pressing down on him like a physical force. Finally, she nodded. Meet me at my house tonight. I'll tell you everything. Benjamin blinked, startled by the sudden shift. You will? I will, she said firmly. But not here. Monica's modest home sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by tall oak trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. The faint glow of a porch light illuminated the walkway, casting long shadows across the gravel path. Benjamin pulled up in his car, stepping out cautiously. The quiet of the area was almost unnerving after the chaos of the courtroom. He knocked lightly on the door, and Monica answered almost immediately, as though she'd been standing there waiting. She wore a simple navy sweatshirt and black leggings, a stark contrast to the poised appearance she'd maintained earlier in the day. Her hair was tied back, and her expression was unreadable. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Benjamin entered, his eyes scanning the space. The living room was neat and sparsely decorated, with only a few personal touches, a framed photograph of a younger Monica in a navy uniform, her arm around an older man in a similar uniform, a folded American flag displayed in a glass case on the mantel, a bookshelf filled with titles on leadership, strategy, and history. You live alone? He asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. For now, she replied, gesturing for him to sit on the couch. Drink? No, I'm fine, he said, sitting down stiffly and setting his briefcase at his feet. I'm here for answers, Monica. No distractions. She smirked faintly, appreciating his determination. Fair enough. She moved to the bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound folder. It was worn but well-maintained, the edges frayed slightly from years of use. She placed it on the coffee table in front of him and sat across from him in a chair. Benjamin eyed the folder but didn't reach for it. What's this? My service record, she said simply. Everything you need to know about me, he hesitated. You're serious? You're just giving it to me? You're my lawyer, she said. You need to know who you're defending. Benjamin opened the folder carefully, his fingers brushing against the pages. Inside were neatly organized documents, discharge papers, commendations, training certifications. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents. Wait, he muttered, flipping through the pages faster. You were a Navy SEAL? She finished for him. Lieutenant Commander, retired. He stared at her, his mouth slightly open. Monica, this changes everything. Why didn't you tell me before? Because it's not just about who I was, she said, leaning forward. It's about what Simmons represents. This isn't just my fight, Ben. It's about exposing the kind of corruption and bias that allows people like him to get away with this. Benjamin ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. The prosecutor is going to lose it when this comes out. And Simmons, he'll crumble. Monica's expression darkened. Simmons won't crumble. Benjamin frowned. What do you mean? She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Men like him double down when they're cornered. That's why we have to be smart, strategic. Benjamin nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her words. Do you think he knows? Not yet, she said, but he's suspicious. You saw how he looked at me today. He knows there's something he doesn't know, and it's eating at him. Benjamin closed the folder and leaned back, letting out a long breath. So what's the plan? Monica's eyes glinted with a quiet determination. Tomorrow we show the court the truth. But we don't just expose Simmons for lying, we expose the system that enables him. And how do we do that? He asked, leaning forward. Monica stood, her presence commanding even in her casual attire. She walked to the mantel, picking up the folded flag. She turned it over in her hands before looking back at him. We make them see me, she said, not as a defendant, but as the woman who spent 20 years protecting the very freedoms that man tried to strip from me. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, a quiet storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. Benjamin felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the sheer force of her resolve. Monica, he said softly, tomorrow's going to be a fight. She placed the flag back on the mantel, her hand lingering on it for a moment. Then she turned to him, her eyes fierce. I've been fighting my whole life, Ben. Tomorrow's just another battle. The next morning, The courthouse loomed in the pale gray light of dawn, its imposing facade casting long shadows over the bustling crowd that had gathered on the steps. News of the trial had spread quickly overnight, whispers turning into a roar of speculation. The gallery was filled with spectators, journalists scribbling in notepads, community members eager to see justice, and Simmons's fellow officers, who lined the back row in a silent show of support for their comrade. Inside, the courtroom hummed with anticipation, the atmosphere tense and electric. Monica sat at the defense table, her expression calm but focused. Her navy blue blazer and neatly pressed white shirt gave her a commanding presence, one that seemed to silence the room even before the judge entered. Beside her, Benjamin Carter flipped through his notes, his nerves betrayed by the subtle tapping of his pen against the table. "Are you ready for this?" he asked in a low voice, glancing at her. Monica turned her head slightly, her gaze steady. "I've been ready for years, Ben. Let's give them the truth." The gavel struck, and Judge Grayson entered the room, his stern face surveying the crowd. "Court is now in session. We will continue with the case of State versus Monica Jackson." The prosecutor, his confidence noticeably diminished, stood. "Your Honor, we intend to reinforce the testimony of Officer Simmons today and present additional evidence to support the charges against the defendant." Monica didn't flinch. Her hands rested lightly on the table. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, but she remained as steady as a rock in the tide. The prosecutor called Officer Simmons back to the stand. Simmons adjusted his tie as he walked up, his movements slower than usual, weighted by the scrutiny pressing in from every angle. He sat down, shifting in his seat before facing the courtroom. "Officer Simmons," the prosecutor began, his voice firm but measured, "please remind the court of the events that led to the defendant's arrest." Simmons cleared his throat, but there was a hint of strain in his voice. "As I stated before, I encountered the defendant near a closed business. She was acting suspiciously, refused to identify herself, and became physically aggressive when I attempted to question her." "And you stand by your account of her behavior?" the prosecutor pressed. "I do," Simmons said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. The prosecutor nodded, satisfied. "Thank you, Officer Simmons. No further questions." Benjamin rose slowly. His expression was unreadable as he buttoned his jacket and approached the stand. "Officer Simmons," Benjamin began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "You testified that my client became aggressive and attempted to reach for your weapon. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Simmons replied, his posture rigid. "And yet," Benjamin continued, "you also stated that your body camera malfunctioned during the incident." "Convenient, wouldn't you say?" Simmons' jaw tightened. It was an unfortunate coincidence. "Equipment malfunctions happen." "Of course they do," Benjamin said with a slight nod. "But you've been on the force for what, 10 years? How often has your body camera malfunctioned during an arrest?" Simmons hesitated. "Not often," he admitted. "But it happened this time." Benjamin pressed forward. "During an arrest where you claim the defendant behaved so aggressively that you feared for your safety?" "Yes," Simmons said, though his voice was noticeably quieter. Benjamin turned, pacing slowly in front of the jury. "And is it also a coincidence, Officer Simmons, that a witness in the area captured part of this encounter on their phone?" The courtroom erupted into whispers. The gallery leaned forward, as if they could will the evidence into existence. Judge Grayson struck his gavel, demanding order. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, his voice sharp, "if you have evidence, present it." Benjamin returned to the defense table, retrieving a USB drive. "Your Honor, the defense submits video evidence recorded by a bystander during the arrest." The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense should have submitted this earlier." "Sit down," Judge Grayson interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Let's see the footage." The bailiff took the drive and inserted it into the courtroom's media system. The screen on the wall flickered to life, and the room fell into a heavy silence. The footage was shaky, the angle partially obscured by the frame of a car window, but the audio was clear. Simmons' voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his hand gripping Monica's arm. Her voice followed, calm but firm. "I'm not resisting. Let go of my arm." The crowd watched, riveted, as Simmons shoved Monica against the patrol car. His words were clear now, biting and unmistakable. "Women like you don't get to question me." The courtroom erupted again, louder this time. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, his face darkening with frustration. "Order! I will have order in this court." But it was too late. The damage was done. During recess, the tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Monica sat silently at the defense table, unshaken by the chaos the video evidence had unleashed. Beside her, Benjamin was pacing, muttering under his breath. "This is huge, Monica," he said finally, stopping to face her. "That footage just tore his testimony apart." Monica folded her hands neatly on the table, her gaze steady. "It's a crack in the wall, Ben. But walls don't fall with cracks alone. We need more." Benjamin exhaled sharply, leaning on the table. "What's the next move?" "We've got the video, and we've got your service record. We could bury Simmons with this." She looked at him, her expression softening just slightly. "It's not just about burying Simmons," she said. "It's about exposing the truth. If we rush, we risk losing control of the narrative. Timing is everything." Before Benjamin could respond, the bailiff's voice cut through the room. "Court will reconvene in 5 minutes." Monica stood, adjusting her blazer. "Stay sharp, Ben. It's time." When the judge entered and the courtroom was called to order, all eyes were on Officer Simmons. The confident smirk he had worn earlier was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression and darting eyes that betrayed his growing unease. His fellow officers in the back row exchanged uncertain glances, their silent support now tinged with doubt. Judge Grayson's voice broke through the tension. "Mr. Carter, do you have additional evidence to present?" Benjamin rose, his movements deliberate and composed. "Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call the defendant, Monica Jackson, to the stand." The room buzzed with renewed interest. Monica stood, her steps measured as she approached the witness stand. She didn't rush, didn't falter. Her presence alone seemed to command the room's attention. And when she sat, her posture was as straight as a soldier at attention. "Miss Jackson," Benjamin began, his tone steady, "you've heard the accusations against you resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, attempting to seize a weapon. Are these accusations true?" "No, they are not," Monica replied firmly, her voice carrying across the room. Benjamin nodded. "Then let's talk about what really happened that night. In your own words, tell the court how your encounter with Officer Simmons unfolded." Monica took a slow breath, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Benjamin. "That night, I was heading home after visiting a friend," she began. "I stopped to check my phone for directions when Officer Simmons approached me. He asked what I was doing there, and I told him. When he asked for my ID, I questioned why he needed it. I wasn't doing anything illegal, and I wanted to know what his reasoning was." "And how did he respond?" Benjamin asked. Monica's jaw tightened slightly. "He accused me of being uncooperative. When I tried to explain myself, he grabbed my arm and refused to let go despite me telling him I hadn't done anything wrong." Benjamin took a step closer to the jury. "Did you threaten him in any way?" "No," Monica said firmly. "I told him to let go of my arm. When I tried to pull away, he shoved me against the patrol car and handcuffed me. He then accused me of reaching for his weapon, which is a complete fabrication." The gallery murmured again. But Monica wasn't finished. "His actions weren't about law enforcement," she continued, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "They were about control, about asserting power over someone he assumed couldn't fight back." Benjamin paused, letting her words hang in the air. "Miss Jackson, there's been a lot of speculation about your background. The prosecution has painted you as an ordinary civilian who suddenly turned violent. Is there more to your story that the court should know?" Monica's eyes met Benjamin's, and for the first time, her calm exterior gave way to a flicker of something deeper resolve, strength, and perhaps a hint of anger. "Yes," she said, "there is more." The room held its collective breath. Monica leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the edge of the stand. "I am Lieutenant Commander Monica Jackson," she announced. "Retired Navy SEAL." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Grayson seemed momentarily taken aback. Simmons' face turned pale. Benjamin stepped forward, his voice rising. "Miss Jackson, as a Navy SEAL, you were trained to handle high-pressure situations. Did you use any of that training during your encounter with Officer Simmons? Yes, Monica said. I used it to stay calm, to de-escalate the situation, and to protect myself from harm without resorting to violence. The courtroom was stunned, and the truth had finally begun to take its rightful place. The weight of Monica's revelation hung in the air like a thundercloud, ready to burst. A Navy SEAL. Not just any defendant, Lieutenant Commander Monica Jackson, a woman who had spent 20 years defending her country. The jury exchanged glances. Even Judge Grayson, who had remained impassive throughout the trial, sat a little straighter in his chair. At the plaintiff's table, Officer Simmons clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His world was collapsing around him, and he knew it. Benjamin let the silence stretch, allowing the gravity of Monica's words to settle. Then he turned back to his witness. Miss Jackson, he said, his voice carrying through the room, as a Navy SEAL, you were trained in combat, weren't you? Yes. You were trained to neutralize threats, to fight if necessary. Yes. Benjamin paused, glancing toward the jury before continuing. But you didn't fight Officer Simmons that night, did you? Monica shook her head. No, I didn't need to. And why is that? Monica sat up a little straighter. Because he was never a threat to me, she said, her voice unwavering. He was a threat to my dignity. He was a threat to my rights. But physically? No. I had no reason to fear him. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Monica continued, her voice growing stronger. I didn't resist because I knew that's what he wanted. He wanted me to react so he could justify what he did next, but I refused to play into that. I stayed calm. I asked questions. And that, in his eyes, was enough to justify slamming me against a car. Benjamin turned, pacing slightly. Miss Jackson, let's go back to something Officer Simmons claimed. He stated that you reached for his weapon. As someone with extensive combat training, do you think you could have taken his weapon if you really wanted to? A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Monica's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. If I had wanted his weapon, she said, he wouldn't have been able to stop me. The room erupted into whispers. Simmons visibly tensed, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. Judge Grayson banged his gavel. Order in the court! Benjamin raised a hand, signaling for calm before turning back to Monica. But you didn't try to take it, he said. Did you? No, Monica answered. Because I had no reason to. Benjamin nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. The judge exhaled, slowly before looking toward the prosecutor. Mr. Avery, your witness. The prosecutor, Richard Avery, stood stiffly. He straightened his tie, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. He approached Monica with caution, as though she were something he couldn't quite figure out how to handle. Miss Jackson, he started, keeping his tone even. You've painted yourself as calm and rational, but isn't it true that your actions that night escalated the situation? Monica didn't blink. No, she said simply. But you refused to comply with a lawful order, didn't you? Monica tilted her head slightly. Was it lawful? She asked. Was I breaking any laws? The prosecutor hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. Officer Simmons was responding to a call. A vague call about a disturbance, Monica interrupted. That doesn't justify demanding my identification without reason. The prosecutor's jaw tightened. Miss Jackson, your background as a Navy SEAL means you know how to read a situation. Couldn't you have just complied to avoid confrontation? Monica's gaze sharpened. And what would that have changed? She asked. If I had complied without question, would it have ended there? Or would he have found another reason to escalate the situation? The prosecutor opened his mouth, but Monica pressed on. I've seen this play out before. People comply and still end up in handcuffs. People comply and still end up on the ground. Some don't make it home at all. So, tell me, Counselor, was my real crime that I didn't comply? Or was it that I had the audacity to question why I had to? The courtroom was so silent that a dropped pin would have sounded like a gunshot. The prosecutor's throat bobbed as he swallowed. No further questions, he muttered before quickly returning to his seat. Benjamin's lips twitched. It wasn't often that a witness undid a prosecutor without needing a lawyer's help. Judge Grayson adjusted his glasses before speaking. Very well. Miss Jackson, you may step down. Monica stood, walking with the same deliberate control she had displayed throughout the trial. She returned to her seat, her back straight, her face unreadable. But inside, she knew. The tide had turned. The final blow came faster than anyone expected. As the prosecutor scrambled to regain control of his case, Benjamin Carter stood once more. "Your Honor," he said, holding up a file, "the defense has one final piece of evidence to present." Judge Grayson nodded. "Proceed." Benjamin turned toward the jury, his voice even but powerful. "This," he said, holding up a document, "is Officer Simmons's personnel file. And what it reveals is a pattern of behavior that speaks to his credibility, or rather, his lack of it." The prosecutor jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor." "Overruled," the judge said. "Proceed, Mr. Carter." Benjamin handed copies of the document to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Simmons has been the subject of multiple complaints, excessive force, racial bias, misconduct, and time again these complaints were buried by the department." The jury read the documents, their faces growing darker with each page. "But today," Benjamin continued, "they come to light. Because this isn't just about one incident. This is about a pattern of abuse, a pattern that culminated in the false arrest of Lieutenant Commander Monica Jackson." A murmur spread through the gallery. Even Judge Grayson's expression hardened as he scanned the documents before him. Benjamin turned to Monica. "And now, it's time for her to speak her truth." Monica stood. She walked to the front of the courtroom, her presence filling the space. She looked toward the jury, her voice steady. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Monica Jackson," she said. "I served my country for 20 years. I've faced enemies on the battlefield, but I never thought I'd have to fight one in my own country." She turned toward Simmons, whose face was frozen in silent panic. "You underestimated me, Officer Simmons," she said. "But more importantly, you underestimated the truth. And the truth has a way of coming to light." Simmons' jaw clenched. The jury's eyes were locked onto her. They weren't just hearing her words, they were feeling them. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Monica returned to her seat. Benjamin turned to the jury one last time. "You've heard two versions of the same night, one filled with lies, one filled with the undeniable truth. The question before you is simple. Who do you believe?" The jury forewoman didn't hesitate. "We don't need to deliberate," she said, her voice clear. "We're ready to render a verdict." Judge Grayson nodded. "Proceed." The forewoman unfolded the paper in her hands. "In the case of State versus Monica Jackson, we find the defendant." She paused, her eyes locking onto Monica's. "Not guilty on all charges." The courtroom erupted. Monica exhaled, the tension finally leaving her body. Officer Simmons slumped in his chair, his face drained of all color. But it wasn't over. The forewoman continued. "Furthermore, we strongly recommend an investigation into Officer Simmons's conduct." Judge Grayson nodded grimly. "Officer Simmons, the first suggests you retain counsel. This matter is far from over." Monica turned to Benjamin, and for the first time, she allowed herself to smile. Justice had finally spoken, and this time, it had spoken loud and clear. Outside the courthouse, the air buzzed with the energy of a city waking up to the truth. The steps were flooded with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones thrust forward in eager hands. The case had captured national attention, and now the world was watching. Monica Jackson stood at the top of those courthouse steps, her presence commanding, her posture unwavering. Beside her, Benjamin Carter adjusted his tie, clearly still processing what had just happened inside. The crowd hushed as Monica raised a hand, signaling that she was ready to speak. "This isn't just my victory," she said, her voice calm but filled with conviction. "This is a victory for accountability, for justice, for every person who has ever been silenced by those in power." The crowd murmured in agreement, heads nodding. "I didn't fight this battle alone," she continued, "and I won't stop fighting for others." A roar of applause erupted, voices calling her name, hands clapping in admiration. Benjamin leaned in, whispering, "Monica, we don't have to do this now. We can leave." Monica glanced at him, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Ben, I spent 20 years fighting battles. Most people will never see," she said. "I don't run from the ones I can." She turned back to the reporters, her eyes fierce. "For too long, People like Officer Simmons have operated without consequence. That changes today. One reporter stepped forward. "Monica, what do you plan to do now?" Monica paused, the weight of the moment settling over her. "Then," she answered, "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The fall of Officer Simmons. The investigation into Officer Bradley Simmons moved swiftly. Within weeks, more complaints surfaced, incidents that had been buried under mountains of bureaucracy, victims who had been too afraid to speak. Body cam footage from previous arrests, conveniently missing before, suddenly reappeared. The city's Internal Affairs Department found undeniable proof of Simmons' misconduct. And soon, the inevitable happened. Simmons was fired from the force, but the fallout didn't stop there. The district attorney's office launched a full criminal investigation, charging Simmons with perjury, excessive force, and obstruction of justice. The very system he had used to protect himself was now turning against him. At his own court hearing, the same man who had once stood so confidently on the witness stand could barely meet the eyes of the judge. He had built his career on lies, and now those lies had buried him. Monica's next fight. Monica had never planned to be a public figure. She had spent her life serving in the shadows, leading teams in the deadliest corners of the world, always focused on the mission. But now, her mission had changed. People reached out, letters, emails, social media messages from strangers who had watched her trial, who had been inspired, who had their own stories of injustice. Some asked for advice, others simply thanked her. And then came the invitations, speaking engagements, interviews, panel discussions. One day, she sat across from a prominent civil rights attorney who had been following her case. "You have a voice, Monica," the woman told her, "and you have a choice. You can walk away, or you can use that voice to change things." Monica considered the words, and then she made her decision. She founded an organization dedicated to police accountability and reform, working alongside attorneys and activists to push for real change. She testified before committees, met with lawmakers, fought to make body cameras mandatory in every department. She became the voice she never intended to be. And through it all, she never forgot that night, the night she stood face to face with power and refused to back down. Because for Monica Jackson, justice wasn't just an outcome. It was a way of life. The legacy of a fighter. Years later, a new officer stepped onto the force, one who had studied law enforcement, who believed in true justice, who had learned about Monica Jackson's trial in criminal justice courses. One day, that officer would face a moment of choice, and in that moment, they would remember Monica's words. The truth always has a way of revealing itself. And maybe, just maybe, because of her, their choice would be the right one. The end. Thank you for reading. If this story moved you, share it. Let's make sure voices like Monica's are heard, and that justice isn't just something we talk about, but something we demand. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, justice, and redemption. Until next time, that's the end of Monica's journey, at least for now. Let me know if you'd like any changes or an expansion on any part.